This is the city, Bebington Wirral. My name's Powell. I'm a writer. I carry a pen. Hello and welcome to ELLROY Reads, the show where I look and talk about books that were highly influential to James Ellroy in his development as a writer, emotionally, and also in his skills as a stylist. I hope that humorous intro might have given you some clue as to my pick for this week. Yes, the book I will be talking about this week is The Badge by Jack Webb. Now, The Badge was hugely influential to Ellroy, and it's a little bit different from most of the books we've covered. Firstly, it is non-fiction, and we've only covered one other non-fiction book on this show. And secondly, it is more of a coffee table book, i.e. you can dip in and out of it at your leisure, and it's just a joy to return to at any particular moment and at any particular part of the book. And most of the novels we've covered are obviously, much more narrative based, and it's much more important to read them from cover to cover. So to give you some background, Jack Webb was an actor, television producer, director, writer, just extremely talented guy. And in the late 40s, he created the radio show called Dragnet, which was a drama about the LAPD. It subsequently went to television in the early 1950s, and it was huge on television. It was a sensation. It seemed to capture the zeitgeist, as the Eisenhower years. There was freeway expansion, the cities were getting bigger, people were getting wealthier, there was demographic moves towards the suburbs, but with that there was also fears of crime, particularly in Los Angeles. And Dragnet was really, to put it bluntly, LAPD propaganda. The stories were ripped from the pages of LAPD police reports. They were based on real cases. It was made with the cooperation of the LAPD, and it certainly showed the LAPD in a favourable light. And that very much chimed with Jack Webb's view. He thought that mostly policemen in those days, but he thought police officers got a bad rap, and they weren't appreciated by society. They had very low pay, so some of the blame for this probably comes from their own, from politicians and commanding officers. But also he felt that the public didn't sufficiently appreciate them. And in spite of being kind of propaganda leaning, there was an element towards Dragnet which is really held up very well, in which it was a really pioneering police procedural. It would show you realism, which was very important to Webb, with regarding to rank, duties, assignments, police terms, those sorts of things. But television, still in its infancy, was very censored at the time. And The Badge was conceived as being able to show the public, because publishing was less censored than television, cases that were deemed too controversial, too dark, too graphic, and too disturbing for television. So it features the Black Dahlia case, it features the Brenda Allen Hollywood Madam scandal. It also features such disreputable characters as Stephen Nash and Carol Chessman. And James Ellroy first discovered it as a boy. It was a gift for his 11th birthday from his father. Now bear in mind that his mother had been murdered only about 9 months previously, so he was living with his father. The impact of his mother's murder was still not being felt by him emotionally. I mean, he was far too young to process it. It was an unsolved murder. It was also a rape. He didn't know about that at the time. He had been kind of censored from the story. Even nobody knew who the killer was, apart from the killer himself. But his father had censored him from a lot of the details. He was trying to focus on Lee's schooling, because James's birth name is Lee. And he knew that Ellroy was a voracious reader, and it seemed to be the one talent where he was really breaking through. He wasn't precocious in other ways. So Armand Ellroy, his father, really encouraged his reading, censored his reading in some respects, as he wouldn't let him read the Mickey Spillane novels, which Armand had the entire collection of, but he deemed them too graphic, too much sex and violence for his little boy. So he bought him two books for his 11th birthday. One was the complete Sherlock Holmes stories, and the other was The Badge. Now, according to Ellroy, he completely fobbed off the Sherlock Holmes stories. They left him cold. But this book he absolutely devoured and loved. But just as a side note, I've been through every photograph of Ellroy that exists in Ellroy's archive at the University of South Carolina. And I did find a photograph of him reading the complete Sherlock Holmes. I couldn't find a photograph of him reading The Badge, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I do know that he loved this book, and it was certainly a gateway as an 11-year-old for him into something forbidden and dark and mysterious. The biggest impact it had on him was the summation of the Black Dahlia murder case, the murder of Elizabeth Short. That absolutely haunted him. It's only 10 pages long, but it was his introduction to the case. The case would define him. He felt an affinity with Elizabeth Short. He had a crush on her. He fell in love with her as only a little boy can. And so where the story goes from here is Ellroy fell into some very, very hard times. He dabbled with the far right, dabbled with the American Nazi Party. He got expelled from his predominantly Jewish school, Fairfax High, because of that. His father died when Ellroy was only 17. He fell into drink and drugs, housebreaking, voyeurism, lots of petty crime, time in the Los Angeles County Jail and various other jails, and got clean in the late 70s. And in 1981, his first novel was published, Brown's Requiem. Really, it might be something of a stretch to say that The Badge had saved him. After all, he'd read it when he was 11, and his worst years were still very much ahead of him. But the stories in The Badge inspired him, and the idea of being a storyteller, which he'd picked up from his early reading, including The Badge, was certainly instrumental in saving him. So the dates are kind of significant here, as Ellroy died. I've forgotten now. Sorry, can't retake. Ellroy first published his first novel in 1981, and then in 1982, Jack Webb died. He was only 62, still a relatively young man. He had a heart attack. He had probably contributed to it, that doesn't sound too callous a thing to say or too crass, through his incredibly hard-charging work ethic. He was, as Ellroy put it, he was a steak and fries man, a cigaretting man, very little sleep, poor diet. In some ways, he'd lived the Hollywood lifestyle. He'd been married to the beautiful singer and actress Julie London. He was also married to the first Miss USA. Both of those marriages had ended in divorce. Dragnet was cancelled the year Ellroy read The Badge in 1959. In fact, The Badge came out in 58, and it was already kind of the tail end of the Dragnet sensation. And when you think about it, it seems quite blunt to say and obvious, but the 1960s were a very, very different decade for the US. Trust in the establishment and trust in government institutions began to break down with the race riots and the city riots, and in LA particularly the Watts riots, were devastating and really challenged the public's view of the LAPD. And it seems that in the 60s the LAPD didn't have anything as sophisticated as the early 60s at least. Anything as sophisticated as Dragnet and Jack Webb really, arguing at its corner. Chief Parker clung on as chief of police of the LAPD, and he was well past his best. He was dated. He was a dinosaur. But Webb revived Dragnet in the late 1960s. He also had another LAPD show called Adam 12, both of which were really, really successful. And he was planning another LAPD show revival at the time of his death in the early 1980s. That finally squeaked out in 1989 and wasn't particularly successful. There was another revival only a few years ago that wasn't particularly successful. My first introduction to Dragnet, you might find this laughable, was the Dan Aykroyd Tom Hanks film, which I'm not sure if I could watch today, but as a child, I thought that was really, really funny. It was a spoof. It was during Tom Hanks's comedy of rare phrase, which might just be the highlight of his career for me. But Jack Webb, although his performance is deliberately monotone as Sergeant Joe Friday, the character he plays in Dragnet, he's almost like a machine. It's this idea that a cop is not a feeling person. He's not particularly an intellectual person, at least not on the surface. He doesn't show it. But Jack Webb was a good actor. Watch his performance in Sunset Boulevard, the classic Billy Wilder film, to see that. It's actually both funny and sweet and heartbreaking, because he plays the friend of Joe Gillis, played by William Holden. And Webb's fiancée, Nancy Olson, is falling for William Holden hard. And why wouldn't you? He's fabulously handsome, and he's smooth, and he's charming, and he's debonair. And Webb is kind of like geeky, which I know a lot of women love. But like, you can tell, like, next to William Holden, he doesn't really stand a chance. And I always found those scenes like really, maybe it's this element of my personality. I found those scenes really kind of heartbreaking and hard to watch. And I think Webb is a really good actor in it. And he even mentions the Black Dahlia murder case jokingly at a party, a New Year's Eve party in the film. And I'm sure that must have been his line. Either he improv'd it or he somehow managed to get it added to the script, because he was obsessed with LAPD cases, and he finally got the Black Dahlia case into the Badge. And I will say that the Badge, it certainly reflects Webb's conservative view of life, i.e., cops are the good guys, criminals are the bad guys, and criminals deserve to be punished harshly, and cops deserve to be venerated and rewarded splendidly. But that's conservatism, Webb's conservatism, on a very, very basic level. I think he's got a lot in common, and may have been a major inspiration on Joseph Wambaugh's writing, because although in one sense there's no comparison, Wambaugh's talking about cops and their marriages falling apart and they can't stand under the stress, and them going out on these absurd calls that you don't know whether to laugh or cry at. But Webb had this understanding, and it came through in the Badge better, that that you can't fight human nature. So yeah, cops are good, criminals are bad, but in a sense, there's something lurking at the back of his mind, perhaps, that only kind of came to the surface briefly and in flashes of mordant wit, that all police work is kind of arbitrary, not pointless, but arbitrary, in that you're fighting human nature, and that's a battle you're never going to win. I.e., there's always going to be prostitution and narcotics and whatnot, because they play to our tastes on a very primal level that you can't legislate against, really, and you certainly just can't wipe out that element of the human condition. So the Badge was reissued in the early noughties, and James Ellroy wrote the introduction, and he spoke candidly of how how of all the books that have influenced him, this influenced him the most. It features the Black Dahlia case, which became his most famous novel and his lifelong obsession. It features the Brenda Allen Hollywood Madame case that turns up in The Big Nowhere. It features Chessman and Nash, stories that he's put into novellas. And importantly, all of the titles of the chapters are named after police ranks. There's a great breakdown of what the police do, their assignments according to rank, and there's a glossary of police terms, both more official terms but also police slang. And that was very important to Ellroy. He's never served in the LAPD. I mean, he was on the other side of the fence. He was a crim for a number of years. And I know on a professional level that he doesn't like to do a lot of research. I mean, some of us do. Some of us absolutely love to lose ourselves in a musty, dusty library. But Ellroy, after the Black Dahlia, where he'd done a lot of that stuff, he kind of changed. He started hiring researchers who could compile the fact sheets for him, and he loved actually having the fact sheets on his desk, all in like one single document that he could paste together and he could flip through, perfectly indexed, and then just extrapolating on that for fiction. Because I know when he gets going, he writes very, very fast, and the problem of being an academic is it's sometimes hard to write fast because you're beholden to the facts, and he doesn't want to be that way. He wants to use the facts as a kind of malleable font of inspiration. By the 90s, Ellroy had become something of a mouthpiece for the LAPD, defending it in the face of the Rampart scandals and even the Rodney King beating. I remember having a conversation with him. This was years ago. I had a conversation with him when he thought that the policemen hadn't done anything wrong in their assault on Rodney King. He said there was only one out of line thing they did during the whole thing, and he said it was a policeman named Powell, and he snickered at that. And I thought that was very funny. My name's Powell. And he said there's one part where they kicked Rodney King in the head, and that was the only thing they did wrong. Well, I mean, I think that's outrageous. It's disgusting. It's wrong. But, he would go on record and say that. And, that took a lot of, I don't want to be drawn on that so much because I know that the situation has changed now, but with Ellroy's current relationship with the LAPD. But before I get to that, as a reward for his work in promoting the image of the LAPD, the LAPD awarded Ellroy the Jack Webb Award, named after today's author. And Ellroy gave a beautiful speech. He said, Jack Webb was one of the biggest inspirations in my life. I never got a chance to thank him. This feels like my way of thanking him right now on this podium. And in subsequent years, he would actually MC the Jack Webb Awards. In fact, he emceed them one year when he was actually in rehab. He'd had a relapse on prescription pills and was actually drinking beer, which was very out of character for him because he'd been militantly sober since the late 1970s. He'd had one relapse in the early noughties, and then he had one relapse at the end of the noughties, and he's been clean ever since. But he was in rehab, and the job was so important to him to be master of ceremonies at this event that it was arranged that he could be furloughed from this rehab clinic for a couple of hours so he could go to MC this to MC the Jack Webb Awards for the LAPD. And if you want to know that full story, it's quite fascinating. Read my biography of Ellroy, Love Me First in Danger, but more on this in a little bit minute. But now Ellroy's relationship with the LAPD is not quite as strong as it was. Most of the cops he was friends with in the 90s have retired. He's still friends with a lot of retired cops, but I don't think he has that many contacts inside the LAPD. And I think he knows deep down that the LAPD's, I won't say propaganda, its public relations strategy has completely changed. I mean, the murder of George Floyd, that was thousands of miles away, but the murder of George Floyd changed everything for policing in the United States, including the LAPD. And if you go to a police station now, you'll see pride flags. You'll see officers declaring their pronouns and other symbols of modern society, and you won't see these kind of what Ellroy is, which is a kind of attack dog apologist. That is not going to do them any good anymore. And they have to move with the times. Jack Webb was very good for them, and now they have a completely different strategy. So, despite being a proud Jack Webb Award winner, Ellroy's relationship with the LAPD is not as close as it was. But I know he'll always love the LAPD. He'll always love police officers and what they do, the sacrifices they make. I know that will stay with him for as long as he's this side of the sod. And speaking of awards, dear viewer, I'm just back from Bristol, where I attended Crime Fest, where Love Me, Fierce in Danger was nominated for the HRF Keating Award for Best Biography. Sadly, I didn't win in that instance, but it's an absolutely huge thrill to be at Crime Fest, and an honour that the book was nominated. And in fact, the day before I left, I received the fabulous news that this James Ellroy biography has also been nominated for an Anthony Award, and the Anthony Awards will be presented at Bouchercon, which is in Nashville this year at the end of August, so wish me luck for that. If you're a regular viewer, you will know that Love Me, Fierce in Danger won the Edgar Award recently. I was in New York for that. It was the biggest honour of my life and a huge thrill. So I want to thank you for supporting this show, for watching, supporting the book if you haven't read it yet. It's racking up the awards, it's racking up the nominations. What's stopping you? Go out and buy yourself a copy. Okay, it's been great to talk to you about Jack Webb's The Badge and its influence on James Ellroy. I look forward to seeing you again for another episode of ELLROY Reads. Okay, bye-bye.